Hello, listeners. Been wondering how you can help the show? Probably not. But here are 5 things you can do. 1. Subscribe. Support the show by clicking the subscription link in the show notes. 2. Review on iTunes, on our website, www.afraidofnothingpodcast.com, or on whatever app you listen to. 3. Donate. When you go to our website, click the cute coffee cup icon. Or in the show notes, click the subscription link. 4. Share. Sharing really is caring. Tell your friends and even your enemies to check out the show. 5. Watch. Wait a minute, it's a podcast, not a movie. Actually, it's both. Check the show notes to find out where to watch the documentary. You can also rent it on Prime Video. That's it. Oh, one last thing. Enjoy this episode.
The most haunted location that I've been to definitely be Shepton Mallet Prison in the UK. There was at the time they were like excavating the 1600-year-old jail cells that they had just found. The grounds, there was a particular area where all the executions happened. And man, I have never in my life been to an area or a place that just had the darkest, most, I don't know. If death lives somewhere, it lives at Shepton Mallet Prison.
Wow.
Like, it was an area that you just like wanted to run by. You didn't even want to walk.
In a world where nothing is known, nothing is certain, reality is not real. Wake up! Be afraid of nothing. I'm Bob Heskey.
Robert.
The host with the ghost.
This is my podcast, based on my paranormal documentary, Afraid of Nothing. Each episode, we talk to people who see life and the afterlife through a different lens. Join me.
Who is this large man? And what's he doing in our bedroom?
As we lift the veil and open our minds to see beyond our eyes lie. This is Afraid of Nothing.
Welcome, Elizabeth Saint. Thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So you have one really super great background. You are an actress, model, you're an electrical engineer, you are a paraceleb, you've been on a couple TV shows, most of note, Paranormal Lockdown, Ghosts of Shepherdstown, and you're an entrepreneur. You just started Vidi Space, and I was so fortunate. You were referred to me from, I think, a mutual friend, Jeff Belanger, who has been on the show. He does research for Ghost Adventures. He mentioned you guys, and I reached out, and I was very fortunate that you guys brought my film, Afraid of Nothing, on board as part of your Vidi Space platform. So first of all, thank you. And then do you mind giving us a quick introduction of who you are and introduce us to Vidi Space?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's a pleasure to have your film, Afraid of Nothing, on Vidi Space. And we started Vidi Space a couple years ago. It kind of developed from an idea of being more in control of the content we were able to put out. And also we came across so many people in the paranormal community that had content that didn't have like a larger platform to showcase it on, aside from people putting it up on YouTube and stuff like that. But Vidi Space is an online streaming platform, and we have apps available on iOS, Apple TV, Roku, Amazon Fire TV, Android, and Android TV. In the beginning, we kind of just focused solely on Vidi Space in the genre people knew us from. Myself, Nick Groff, and Justin Narragon, we all met doing productions like Ghosts of Shepherdstown and Paranormal Lockdown. The three of us kind of came together to start the creation of Vidi Space. And initially focusing on mostly paranormal, it's quickly, especially within the past year, it's kind of grown out to be a space for filmmakers, indie filmmakers, to be seen in all genres, which has been a unique ride. And we recently started the Vidi Space Film Festival this past year, which has been like a great added component to it, and just finding unique people to showcase on the platform. That it's like these days, unless you know somebody or unless you have a connection to a larger network or a larger studio house, it's very hard to get distribution for your film. And I think my perspective for Vidi Space is we're giving you an added boost, another avenue to be seen, and hopefully help you grow your career as a filmmaker.
You have a lot of great content there, and you are a great platform for indies. One of my favorite production companies is it Small Town Monsters? Is it Seth? What's
Yes.
Seth's last name?
Breedlove, yeah, Seth Breedlove.
I love a lot of those shows, so that's great. I mean, that's one of the the great ones that you have. Can you tell us kind of how you met him, and is there anything new brewing with what he's doing?
Yeah, actually, Seth, we met at Crypticon, a convention that was held down in Kentucky, and he had his table out with his DVDs of the films that he's done, and just started having a conversation. And at that time, I was just getting ready to start like pushing Vidi Space out to not just original content we were creating, but to other filmmakers. So I asked if he would like to host his content also on our platform. And that's kind of how the relationship started. So it's been great. He's been creating, several films a year. I know he's gearing up to be pushing out more content this year. And it's been cool. I've backed a lot. He does every year. He does like these large Kickstarter campaigns, and that's how he funds a lot of his projects. So I definitely advise people to check it out, because it's hard to find filmmakers that are creating like quality content and truly passionate about our field, and especially in anything that has to do with cryptids, because there's so much ghost content, but when it comes to like quality cryptid content, it's cool that we have somebody in that space that's dedicating their life to it.
Yeah, he did. The first one I saw, I think, was on the Mothman, and then he did something on Bigfoot, and then kind of more regional, like Dogman or whatever. He's on a bunch of other kind of regional ones. He really has figured it out for independent filmmaking, how to do it, and he gets better with each one. So he's really, he's one of those guys that's worth supporting in Kickstarter, because he actually gets it done. It's a quality product, and it's out there. So, and he's just one of the many that you guys have. So, and your kind of format for Vidi Space, it's unique. From a user perspective, when my film had its premiere, it's kind of like a little house party. You invite a lot of people, you can watch it, and then there's like a separate chat room where you and Nick and everybody else get together and talk. It's like kind of talking to the whole movie back and forth and stuff. But it's kind of cool. It's a subscription-based model, but you also have films on Amazon Prime, and I think you're going to, beyond like the the Roku and the other interfaces you mentioned, I think you're going to try to reach out to some other platforms as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're mostly a subscription-based model. We also offer films transactionally, so if you want to rent or purchase it. And the goal is always to focus on trying to bring money back to the filmmaker. The Friday night live stream premieres, every Friday we have new content that we stream live, and we like to have the filmmaker be a part of the chat, because then people get to ask questions. I think it's a cool, neat interaction that you don't normally get, like direct access to the person that's made the film. And then with our transactional side, it's also unique because we have it set. It's like a cool, like, pay what you feel option. So if to rent or buy a film, let's say if you wanted to purchase a film, it was $7. Anything above that cost goes directly to the filmmaker, and we don't take anything out of that. So it's a cool way to support filmmakers and what they're trying to do.
And, look, we'll throw plugs in intermittently. What's the, is it vidispace.com, or what's the,
Yeah, vidispace.com will get you there, but it's just vidi.space. I know for a while it was a little confusing. But it's just .space. Instead of .com, it's .space. But if you Google it, it'll also just come up.
Yeah, it's funny. When I was doing your email to invite you to this too, I saw it's vidi.space, and I was looking for I was doing a knee-jerk reaction looking for the com too, or at gmail.com. But yeah.
Yeah.
So you have a great background in paranormal investigations. I watched Ghosts of Shepherdstown last night on Amazon, which people can watch, among other things, Paranormal Lockdown. Before we get into that, and kind of you're very unique in terms of all the people I interviewed, you also your electrical engineering background. We want to talk about your equipment that you make for some of these shows and what you recommend. But before we get to that, let's do the first film festival you guys had. Do you want to call out kind of how that went and some of the projects you had, and maybe that they're available now on Vidi Space?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there was, it was interesting. I didn't know what to expect. Film Freeway is a fantastic source for people that want to submit their films to festivals all over the world. And a year ago, I thought that it would be a great complement to Vidi Space. So we had our first annual film festival this year outside of the Washington, D.C. area in February. And we had submissions in over 22 countries, which was fantastic. I really didn't know what to expect for the first year. We didn't really advertise it that much, but we had a lot of submissions and fantastic submissions. And something unique that we also do is we have the Spacer's Choice Award. We had 5 different judges this year. We had Jeffrey Reddick, who started the Final Destination franchise. We had Kevin Tenney, who's known for the Witchboard film and Night of the Demons. And then we had Chad Lindbergh, Nick Groff, myself, and we chose one spacer, as we call it, a person that's subscribed to Vidi Space but doesn't have any affiliation on the back end of the platform or on the business side, to choose the person to win the Spacer's Choice Award. And if you win that award, you get this cool little abduction trophy, we call it. Looks like a little UFO abducting a film reel. But you also get $1,000 towards your next production. So the winner this year was this really great horror animation called To Your Last Death. And we had a lot of fantastic submissions in all categories, which was really cool. Squatch, Iowa was our winner for one of our laurels that we created was the Cup Award, Best Feature Cup Award. So that would be cryptid, UFO, paranormal, specifically for that category. And they won for that. And it was a great experience. We had all of our speakers come out and have panel discussion, and then selected some of the filmmakers that had won awards to also have their own panel. And it was a really cool experience. And I look forward to next year when we host it.
Yeah, and I think your timing was just right. You hit it right before all this kind of fallout of COVID and all the bad stuff in 2020, right?
Literally right before, yes.
Yeah. I mean, Jesus. Yeah, I mean, I think you were the last one. I have submitted, I've made a couple of films via Film Freeway, and I love it. Yeah, they are a great platform. And, now I hear from a lot of film festivals are like begging for work now because people have been, I think the submissions have dropped a lot this year. Yeah, it is hard putting on a film festival. I know from going there to several and meeting the people that run it, but that's a real labor of love. And that you have awards and monetary prizes, I mean, that's a big draw. That's what and a chance for a distribution platform. Those are 3 biggies that I think any filmmaker wants,
yes, yeah.
So, all right. So now let's get on to the ghost side. Let's talk about Ghosts of Shepherdstown, because I watched a couple episodes. I was telling you offline before we start hitting record, and I jumped to the last couple episodes. That's really intriguing. It's different than a lot of other paranormal shows that I've seen. It's kind of like almost like a mini series.
Yeah.
So you want to talk about the premise of it and kind of where that ended up?
So I moved down to the Washington, D.C. area actually for my work as an electrical engineer, working for the DoD. And at the time, I didn't really know too many people in the DC area. I didn't know anybody actually, but I moved into it's the truth. I moved into an apartment at the time though, where I started having a lot of strange things happening, and it wasn't like it was uncommon for me. I've had experiences with the paranormal since I was 4 years old. And it wasn't something that I talked about, discussed with anybody, nothing. It was just something that I kind of kept to myself, mostly because I just didn't want people to think that I was crazy. And, like when we were younger, it wasn't necessarily something anybody really discussed. You might be interested and intrigued, but.
Yeah, if you don't mind me interject, I've talked to a bunch of mediums. I talked to one. Her name is Colleen Costello. She's a Celtic medium.
Oh, I know her. She's great.
Oh, yeah, she's awesome. She was like my 3rd and 4th episode. And so she she was adopted and born into a Catholic family, and so she totally didn't talk.
Oh, me too. I was adopted, born
Oh,
into a
really?
Catholic
Okay.
family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
So yeah. So that was like one example. And then I talked to some other people that came from a paranormal family, so it was okay. But it does run the gamut. Do you still have that, or did you grow out of that kind of seeing ghosts and experiencing the paranormal? Are you still a sensitive?
Oh, yeah. No, I still experience it, definitely. That's one of the reasons why I ended up getting into the paranormal. As a kid, I was always interested in really weird things. I loved reading about aliens, space, ghosts, dinosaurs, just things that were just kind of
Well, that came out
unknown
of
at
left
the
field.
time. Yeah, I gotta add that in there. But so when I moved down to the DC area and moved into this apartment, it wasn't abnormal that I was having experiences. It was to the level that it was, and it started just becoming like uncomfortable for me, to the point where I couldn't necessarily ignore anymore that I was having these experiences. And for myself, I wanted to validate them in some way instead of just trying to push it off or shut it out of my life. So I scoured the internet and was trying to look for a local something. I didn't know what it was going to be at the time. And I didn't know that like paranormal groups was such a big thing at that time either. And I was looking around and I was like, wow, there's a lot of paranormal groups. Who would have known? I really had no idea. And I thought it was great. And I found this one group, Maryland Paranormal Research. It was a perfect team for me because most of the people in the group were either prior military or worked for the government in some way, shape, or form. And it was a very logical, data-driven group. And I thought to myself, like, I'm having like these like very personal experiences. And a lot of times I can't find any logic to it. And I think as an engineer, I struggled with that aspect a bit.
Yeah.
There's a part of my brain that's like, needs explanation and needs to find the reason why. And then there's the other side of me that is very fluid and it would have these experiences that I just couldn't explain.
You must drive your brain crazy because you got one side that's the spiritual side and the other side that's the logical science side. So you must have this inner battle debate going on the whole time, right? And
For sure. That's oftentimes why I'm very quiet and to myself. There's really just a mental war happening at all times. I was like, oh, I felt something. Oh, this is bizarre. What did I just see? Did I really see that? No, I didn't. Shut up, Elizabeth. Like, it's just like, just like a constant. But I see now in the future, which I'll talk about in a second, but how it became advantageous when I started like combining building equipment with the paranormal. So I found this team and we started investigating. And the very first day, very first investigation, I'm sidetracking a bit, but it was a cool validation for me.
Yep.
So very first investigation, it was a residential house. This woman in Northern Virginia, she was a prior paranormal investigator. And I didn't know anything about her or the location. They just told me to show up. So I got there maybe like 20 minutes late, and I walk in and the door was already open because people had been bringing in gear. And I walk in and I immediately hear upstairs this like boy laughing and like running down the hall. And I was confused because one of the things that Hiram, who owns Maryland Paranormal Research, said to me was that we don't have children at the location when we're investigating and stuff like that. So I was confused as to why someone might have been there. So I go into the kitchen and I meet Hiram for the first time. And then I meet the owner of the house. And I said, I'm so sorry. Like, I just want to make sure like no kids are going to be here right during the investigation. And she's like, I don't have any children. And I was like, oh, I just heard a little boy upstairs though. And she's like, oh, that's Billy. And immediately I was like, you gotta be kidding me. I was like, that's it. I found something here. There's validation. I don't know if this is like a calling of some sorts, but in that moment, I felt like relief of like the past 20 something years of me constantly doubting the experiences that I was having.
God, you really did keep it to yourself. Wow, that's amazing.
I did. Yeah. So anyways, I started investigating with Maryland Paranormal Research, and that's actually how they found me for Ghosts of Shepherdstown. because at the time they were trying to look for local investigators. So myself and Bill Hartley were both investigators from the DMV area. He had his own group in Maryland that he was running at the time, and I was from a paranormal group. And they kind of were looking, they just wanted to bring local investigators into the show. And they asked my group, and I said, I thought I'd be interested. To be honest, I wasn't sure how I felt about being on a reality show. I never heard of Destination America. I also didn't watch TV, so it's definitely a channel that not everybody gets. But I thought to myself, maybe people won't see this. I don't know.
A bunch of people I've talked to, a lot of people may think like paranormal investigators are like, looking, publicity hounds, but most people aren't. It's not their natural thing to get on TV and do stuff. They just kind of go with it because it's being filmed. But a lot of the people I've even interviewing for this podcast, they're kind of a little gun shy and nervous about hearing their voice, but they have such great stories. And once they start talking, it just really is a great, experience for everybody to hear them. So yeah, I think a lot of the people see aren't doing it for the fame. It's for the love of it. It's now there's just such an interest in it right now.
Oh, absolutely. And the talking about, you mentioned it a bit before, the format being different. The reason why it was so appealing to me was they told me you'll be working with the police there. The police is very small. There's like 4 guys on Shepherdstown is, even though it's the oldest town in West Virginia, predating the Revolutionary War, it's still like, there's like 4 guys on the force. And then Sergeant King, who he became Chief King in season 2, we worked directly with him, and he was fantastic. But they said you'd be working with the police. There would also be a medium, a local historian you'd be working with, and you'd be investigating the whole town. And I was like, man, like how often do you get to do something like that? Yeah. Usually it's like one and done. You get in and out of location. But you don't really get a chance to spend days, and in our case, it was months, in one town, like unraveling it and finding out the details of these locations, the connections between the locations. And it was unique for the time with paranormal shows, because most of it was just going from one location to the next. But it was really cool with Shepherdstown because we got to find the connections amongst the different places in the town. And with a town that old, it was amazing to see how it was all connected.
Yeah, and not to do a spoiler, but just to throw a tease out, it involves ghosts and demons. And what really freaks me out, and I've seen Nick do this a couple times, I'm a burly guy, and he's like a lean, mean guy, in shape guy, going into these tight caves and underground and stuff. That's always like claustrophobic. But
yeah,
oh my god,
spelunking.
Yeah,
that's one of my favorite episodes. It really was. Yeah. I never done it before. I've been an athlete my whole life, so for me, I was like, yes, I can't wait. I would love this.
So, were you the camera person? Were you the person with the camera following them in there, or?
No. We only had 2 camera guys, and in season 1, it was Scott McKibben and another guy named Addison. And Scott was there for both seasons, and it was so funny because down in the cave, it was just Nick, myself, and Scott, and the cave expert who came down with us. It was we always were like a small crew. There wasn't a lot of people, which I enjoyed because I always felt like everything gets a little like convoluted when there's way too many people, and it just doesn't feel the same.
You can't fit too many people in a tight cave. I don't think I saw episode 1 yet with you. I was looking at episode 7, the poltergeist one, and with the upside down crosses. Another spoiler. Yeah. But
season 2 is interesting because we get all into the caves, and
it all comes together.
Connection with that, yeah.
And I would just say it wasn't just a town; it was the 4 border towns or something. You were kind of beyond the town too, yeah.
Yeah, season 1 was just in Shepherdstown, and then season 2 it spread out a little bit more to places like Martinsburg and Harper's Ferry. And if you're a local, Harper's Ferry is a place that you hear more about when it comes with ghosts. I mean, to be honest, I never heard of Shepherdstown, before the show, and I only live an hour outside of it. It's such a cute place.
Yeah.
Visit. It's definitely got its own unique energy for sure. But there's so many connections, to the wars that happened there. And, there was the Battle of Shepherdstown, Battle of Antietam is right there.
Uh-huh.
So it's a lot of history that affected that space.
You know what it reminded me? It reminded me of a documentary series now that I think about it, because it's like, even when I made my documentary, Afraid of Nothing, it was experimental. I went in. I've done a movie, and a movie, I wrote the script, and you know how it ends, right? But a documentary, if it's experimental, you go into it, and you don't know how it's going to end. And I think, again, without revealing too much, but there was a lot of stuff that came together, it seemed, on season 2 for you on that show.
It did, and for myself personally, I know some of the other cast members felt this way. There was still, we felt like a lot more that you could have done. When they first did Shepherdstown, it was supposed to just be like a 6-part special series. There was no intention to do a season 2, but so much came out of season 1 that it was very easy to expand it to a season 2. And I think more could have been done since then too. But, to my knowledge, it's done, unfortunately. Yeah. But they did go off with a different group and did something like, I think, down in the Bayou or something. They tried to do something, but I don't know. In my opinion, there's still a lot more that you could unravel about Shepherdstown just based off of the things that we found there.
Hello, listeners. I want to play a game. But first, a disturbing interruption to our podcast.
Whoa, you must be the new roommate. What's your name?
Annabelle.
Hi, Annabelle. What are you doing on my Allswell mattress?
I need to possess it.
Yeah, hey, look, I get it. Allswell mattresses are the best. Its hybrid mattress technology gives you the comfort of memory foam with the support of individually wrapped coils, all at a really great price.
Allswell.
Yeah, you got it. You can even try it for 100 nights, risk-free. And if you're not satisfied with the sleep that you're getting, simply ship it back. Plus, every Allswell mattress comes with a 10-year limited warranty. So if you ever have any problems, you don't have to worry about being stuck in bed hell. There's only one problem. You need to get your own. Oh, and you get free shipping on your first Allswell mattress simply by following the link in the show notes. It helps support the podcast.
Never be afraid of a good night's sleep.
All's well.
And now, back to our horrific program.
Did you create any of the ghost hunting equipment for that show? Did you do any of that stuff?
So in season 2, I did. At the end of season 1, actually, Nick, even though Paranormal Lockdown came out first, we actually filmed Ghosts of Shepherdstown first, which a lot of people don't know. And at the end of season 1 of Shepherdstown, Nick was in the process of beginning to pre-production for filming Paranormal Lockdown in the fall with Katrina Weidman. And he said to me, you're an engineer. Why don't you build something for my series in the fall? And I was like, oh, I've never even thought about, why haven't I thought about doing this? And then I got mad at myself because I was like, I felt like it's because there were so many limitations a lot of times with the equipment I would use in the field, and a lot of things I didn't like about it. And
well, you were suppressing it. Doesn't he know you were suppressing these emotions?
Right. Yeah. So I got a message that fall, and they were doing an episode at Franklin Castle in Ohio. And he said, we're trying to communicate with the children's spirits at this location. Is there anything that you can build? And I don't know why, but for some reason I thought old creepy building, children. I want to make something that mimics a Jack in the Box, so I made this device out of a wooden box. Nothing popped out of it, but I wanted to experiment with something that wasn't experimented with before. So I experimented with capacitive sensing. In the corner of the box, I put in HGYN. So yes, no, hello, goodbye. If something approached the vicinity of one of the corners that was different than the dielectric of air, it would trigger an audio file. So I remember being on location, I was presenting them with these two devices that I had made. The first one was this big box. And the audio file that I recorded was my own voice, but I kind of manipulated it and layered it so it wouldn't sound feminine. It sounded more monotone.
Yeah.
But then the layer I added on top of it made it like more monstrous, right? So I had these little 4-ohm speakers on the side of this box, and they were like powered to the max. So it's dark. They're walking around with the box. All of a sudden, like this sound file triggers, and it's like, yes. And it's like so booming. It's so horrific. And immediately I was trying not to laugh because I'm thinking to myself, no child would ever want to play with this thing. It is terrifying. But I mean, it was the first device I made, and I gave them something else that day too, which is still one of my favorites. It's a sensing digital recorder. So there are 4 different ways in which you could trigger the recorder to start recording. I kind of made it like kind of like an answering machine of sorts. You could leave it in a room. And then if you could come back later, and depending on like which lights were flashing, you would know if a message was left, and also know what triggered the device to start recording. And then you could play it back and see if anything was there. That was like the journey and start of me creating equipment. So season 1 of Shepherdstown, I didn't make any of the equipment, but in season 2, I had made a bunch of equipment for the show.
What about Paranormal Lockdown? Now, that was Nick Groff and Katrina Weidman, who is now on what, Portals to Hell?
Yes.
With Zach Osborne? Yeah. Okay, great. Wow. Want to tell us about that show and anything? Were you involved as a producer on that? Did you do equipment on that? What was your role?
Yeah, so they gave me a cool little title, a paranormal investigation producer.
Wow.
So, but
Yep. VIP.
yeah,
right?
I was like, all right, whatever you guys want to do. Could have just put engineer, but sure, if you could make it fancy, sure. But so the first couple seasons, I had given them some equipment, and then in season 3, they had me fully come on board, so I would be in the field. And essentially, my job was to source paranormal equipment within the community or people that were building it, but then to also create equipment for the show. I built a lot of equipment on the fly, and then to create large experiments for the show, which was awesome. I had a blast doing that because I got a chance to experiment with a lot of things that just aren't done on paranormal reality television. One of the cool things was if they had an experience or something happen, I would be able to, I would say to them, okay, give me an hour and I will create something for this specific instance to see if we can get it to trigger again or capture it. A good example of that is I remember
that's all they gave you was an hour.
No, I told them just give me an hour. I would put my own limits because they're still actively investigating. So, but
oh my God.
I had my travel soldering iron and all of these parts laid out wherever I was allowed to set up. But there was this one time where they were interviewing a lady. I think that they were at Vidi Mansion. They were interviewing this woman on the front porch, and they hadn't even gone into the house yet. And all of a sudden, there was a crash right behind where they were standing on the front porch. And they all went in, and this mirror that was on the wall had fallen and smashed to the floor. And you could still see the nail pegs in the wall, and they weren't straight out or down. They were still straight up. So the wire that was attached to the mirror would have had to have been lifted for it to even come off, because there was no way it would have come off by itself. So I said, in that moment, I was like, give me an hour. But I built a device that essentially I kind of put an accelerometer into this small device that they could mount on the mirror after they put it back up, or on the wall. It was just pieces of it, but still. So the accelerometer, if there were any changes in the X, Y, or Z direction, it would trigger an alarm. And it ended up working the next night, I believe it was, where the alarm started going off as if something was tampering with the mirror. So there were a lot of instances where I would build things based on the scenario, which was very unique because a lot of times the devices that are out there right now are just limited. They're just for very general things, and most people don't really even know what they're doing. But The other aspect that was a lot of fun was experimenting with things like the sensory deprivation tent that I had Nick sleep in the one night. That was interesting in the basement of the Monroe house because he got some interesting results from that. The God helmet. A good friend of mine, Todd Murphy, created this God helmet that actually induces.
A God
Yeah,
helmet.
it sounds
Wow.
wild.
You got to talk.
Well, you get the name because it induces spiritual experiences, and I think a lot of there have been people that have claimed to experience, and see the presence of God and stuff like that.
So how does that work? I see kind of like, it's not a tinfoil thing. What is it like? Is it kind of like sensors on your head, or how does it work?
Yeah, so there's these magnetic coils that there's 16 magnetic coils. There's an eight version as well, but I did the 16, and essentially there's a program that sends patterns of signal to your brain. We did this at Bobby Mackey's Music World.
Oh God, yeah.
I worked with Todd Murphy, who created it, to the hard thing is it's not a controlled environment, right? So to make it as legitimate as humanly possible, I did a session with Nick outside of Bobby Mackey's, and then we did that session inside that was filmed for the show. And no one sees me, but I had to run like really long cable he was in front of the hellhole there in the basement of Bobby Mackey's. He was sitting there with blindfold and the God helmet on. I went into, I was like in a side room that was very dark and very uncomfortable because it was pitch black. And I was running the program to the God helmet where he was having this experience. But he saw and witnessed what he believed to be down there, that it's some kind of created energy. So it was an interesting experiment for sure.
Did you use it again after that?
No, I have it here. When the version that Todd sells is very basic. It's like baseball cap and just has sensors all over it. And I wanted to create an actual helmet. So I took a motorcycle helmet and I drilled holes to the inside and inserted all the sensors. So it looks fantastic. Yeah. It's really cool actually. But I have yet to. I have it here. I have yet to use it. I'm curious. One day I will.
My father was in post World War II. He was in MacArthur's band, but he has this old World War II helmet. I'd love to find that and send that to you and make a God helmet.
Oh yeah, that would be so cool looking.
I'll have to look for it.
Yeah.
What's your favorite, since you're on the engineer side and the equipment? What's your favorite type of equipment to bring to a very active place? What's your go-to 2 or 3 pieces of equipment?
I think that if you can find a really great piece of audio equipment, and to be honest, I've found that a lot of people can have very intelligent communication with something, utilizing all kinds of different audio equipment, whether that just be a simple digital recorder. I wasn't a fan of apps for the longest time because as an electrical engineer, a big portion of my life has been programming. So I know how easy it is to just program something to even mimic like it communicating with you.
Yep.
But since then I've tested a lot out, and there's a lot out there that I do enjoy. Like the Phasma box is a really cool one. The Echo Vox is also a really cool one. There's just a bunch that I think really do work, and that's because I've tested them thoroughly, like at locations, and had fantastic conversations with whatever it is that I was communicating with. So I think that's always really cool, especially if it's a really active location, because you can get a lot out of it.
I was at the Conjuring House. When I was in between houses, I was staying in Webster, and I didn't know the Conjuring House was very close. And I was actually able to go there one day. And one of the guys that's there, his name is John Huntington. He was actually a guest on the show, and he does a lot of EVPs. And they actually did a week-long remote from the Conjuring House. I don't know if you know, it was a virtual kind of week-thing broadcast that they did,
That's cool.
Which is very cool. Yeah. His followers on Facebook went from just a few to, almost 1,000 every time he did it was like several hundred every time he did a post. He's the big EVP guy there. So are EVPs big? I notice sometimes you have like a Mel meter, or is that another thing that you guys like to use a lot? Go in with an EMF meter, and that you find those to be pretty accurate?
So it depends. There was a lot of equipment that's used in the show. that a lot of times I would just have to see abnormalities in the space, but I wouldn't necessarily say that something like a millimeter was because of a ghost. There's too many other things in the environment that could make it trigger. If anything else, it's nice to know when where there's like hot spots of electromagnetic fields occurring in a space, because a lot of times that can affect people.
Yeah.
But yeah, some of the paranormal equipment that's out there is hard sometimes, and I struggle with, mostly because a lot of it is an iteration of the same thing. Jeremy Jones, who's a friend of mine, he has a company, Paranologies. He's also an engineer. And I like the designs that he makes and creates, because he thinks outside the box, and he creates things that are just different, just unique to experiment with. And a lot of his equipment I've tested out and has brought about interesting results. But when it comes to the equipment, I think that the biggest problem in the paranormal community is sometimes like there's a lack of understanding of what it necessarily is doing. And a lot of this equipment, they're not using the best parts. So the area in which it's detecting, it's not necessarily going to give you, well, first of all, a good reading. There's a lot of error that can come about from it, because obviously if you're selling a device, you're not going to want to put the best parts in it, because then you're going to have to make it super expensive. You're not going to have a large margin of sale, and it's hard to mass produce anyways. So I struggle sometimes because, a lot of people spend thousands of dollars on paranormal equipment, and it's something that I've been meaning to do for a while now. I just need to get some time. And I spoke with Jeremy about it too, and he was on board, is having people understand more, whether it be some sort of seminar or something, understand more the devices that they're using, and then teaching people how to actually build simple devices from scratch with like $5 of parts, good parts, $5 to $20, and then not be spending hundreds of dollars on buying something and understanding what it's doing.
Yep.
One of my biggest issues in the field is definitely the 3D mapping device.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
I want to talk about that.
Yeah, because we're taking a device that's meant to be stationary, and people are just mounting it on top of the contraptions with a tablet, and using a lot of times just the free software that comes with Microsoft, or there's a few others too. But they're taking a device that's meant to be stationary and meant to attempt to track and search for edges and linings that look like people. And there's too much room for error. So many times people have passed by a door with that thing, a door frame. Obviously, it's going to sometimes trigger and make it seem like something is there. There's just too many instances where I'm not saying that it's not possible, but I am saying that people too much accept the fact that anything that's detected by it is going to be a ghost. It's not meant to be utilized the way it's being utilized. And there are other options in the market that aren't as expensive. And I've spoken to people about that. Per se makes a really interesting 3D depth sensor, 3D mapping device that comes with software. And it's like a couple $100 versus somebody spending a few thousand. And you're automatically getting something that has better quality parts inside and is used to actually a lot of times go around a 3D object to map it, versus something that's meant to be stationary for gaming. So I struggle a bit when it comes to some of the equipment and the costs that people are selling these things for, because it doesn't have to be so costly to investigate the paranormal, and you can do it with better parts and a better understanding of what you're actually detecting.
So, when I get my bonus, I'm going to spend it on getting a God helmet from you versus buying a hacked.
Well, the God helmet, so I'll modify it for you, but the God helmet in itself is quite expensive.
Okay.
But that's just because it's unique and not many people are buying it. But yeah, but other things for sure. Yeah.
Cool. One thing I'm dying to ask is, so now that you mentioned you keep it to yourself internally, I do, I've seen you on a couple episodes, and sometimes I do see like an intense look, but you are keeping quiet to yourself.
Mm.
Yeah, I've noticed. So when you're at these locations with Nick or whomever, do you see stuff, and in your mind, do you tell them afterwards off camera, did you see that little girl in that corner over there? Or does that happen where they are walking around and you're seeing stuff that they aren't?
Oh, that's a great question. No one's ever asked me that, but it's true. The way it happens is all different things. There's definitely times where I see things, and the first season of Shepherdstown was different for me. because I had been with my group for it was probably about a year. Could have been a little less than a year. But I was still getting comfortable with verbalizing what I was experiencing or seeing. And at the same time, a lot of people don't know this. I had my daughter about a month before we started filming Shepherdstown.
Wow.
And when I was pregnant, actually, it was weird. It was like a strange void. I didn't have like any experiences.
Oh my! I would have thought the opposite. I would have thought you would have been super Oh God.
No. I've read. I did with my daughter. I had like a very strong, unspoken bond with my daughter, and I would have experiences with her. But I didn't have any of the other experiences that I was used to. And I did a lot of research, and I found out that it's not uncommon, because what your body kind of does is, tries to protect the baby. So by doing that, it's kind of like shutting out everything else from accessing it, I guess.
Yep.
So, but what was interesting is after I had her, it was like things were trickling back, but they weren't trickling back the way I experienced it before. And it was like learning about the sensitivity in a totally new way. And so there would be like, it was interesting for me because like the first week I was like, I don't really feel anything. And then I think the first time I had had an experience since giving birth to my daughter was up in the attic of the sweet shop. And we were walking around up there, and all of a sudden I just felt like something was like pushing me into the floor, and I just couldn't really move.
Oh.
And I was like, oh, this is different. Because in my life, the experiences that I had, sometimes I would see things, I would feel things a lot, but I wouldn't feel like as affected as I did after giving birth to my daughter. So now I'm on this show. I'm trying to like gauge, what's different about the experiences now that I'm having. And then I'm still trying to get comfortable with the fact of verbalizing it, knowing that a lot more people are going to know about this after it goes live.
Yeah.
And I think I was like going through all of this in my head because I was still struggling with like this new side, these new experiences that were way more intense than they were before. It was interesting for me. So yeah, a lot of times that I was quiet, you hit the nail on the head. I was a lot of times for me, I was processing it. There were times where I would see things, and off camera, I would, or like, later in the day, I would go to Lori and I would explain to her what I had saw, and she would validate for me the same thing. And it was still a process for me in season 1 to get through all of that, for sure.
Yeah, see, I have always had tunnel vision my entire life, and I actually, the death of my mother is what kind of spurred me to make. She actually had dementia with other maladies, and that kind of spurred me to make Afraid of Nothing, because I wanted to talk to people that could see things that I didn't, because like my mother's death left me really cold.
Yeah.
And then I first one I met was a shaman, and I have a daughter. I have 2 daughters. My youngest is autistic, and she had some experiences when she was young. There's this video I put on YouTube, The Ghost in Emily's Crib, where there was this time. It was about 10 years ago, and we were in this house, and for one period, for 2 weeks, there was this little sinewy spirit kind of like traipsing. It was a spidery thing over her crib while she's over her while she slept. And my ex-wife had said, you look at this, and being the inattentive husband, I'm like, yeah, whatever. And then finally, I'm home alone one day, and I'm watching it while she's out. And I took it was a crappy camera. 10 years ago doesn't seem long ago, but it was really a crappy camera, and bad video monitor, and I actually videotaped that and put it on YouTube, and it was actually a couple paranormal podcasts. But she also had a later experience with a shaman that came to the house. He was actually interested, and he thought autistic kids were like humans 3.0. He was interested in them. And then,
absolutely.
Yeah. And then one point she was having, I don't know what it was. She was having a problem. And my ex-wife asked him if he could do a remote healing. He's like, I'll ask her if it's for permission. And I have this email I mentioned on another show where he does this journey where in his mind, he goes to this rock, and then he goes down to get to the underworld to get Shadow, his spirit animal. Then he goes to heal the people. Whatever the journey, is. So he goes to this rock, which is in his mind. And for the first time in thousands of journeys, he saw my daughter there waiting for him.
Oh.
Literally blew. I mean, the email I got was like 4 paragraphs of his mind being blown. And he was like, okay. And then he brought her with her, and she watched as he worked on her, just curious. And then he brought her back to the rock. He said, you know how to go back? Yes, I do. And the next day she's fine, and she never really talked about it. So for me, my kids kind of got me into this. I've always had an interest, but that episode with my mother and then my daughter really kind of got me interested in this. So it was kind of an interesting journey. Does your daughter, do you know, or are you comfortable saying, does she have any psychic abilities that you can tell yet? Or
Yeah, actually. And she just recently turned 5, and I was about 4 when mine started happening.
Yeah.
And I was for a while I was thinking to myself like, maybe it won't happen, because it wasn't a pleasant experience for me as a kid.
Yeah.
So I didn't want her to go through the same thing that I did, because a lot of times as a child it's hard, because I know as a parent you want to keep them safe, secure, make sure that they know like, nothing's there and stuff like that. But for me growing up, that wasn't the thing that I needed to hear, I think, a lot of times.
Yeah.
And it's difficult because, you have a big imagination, and I don't think you can always chalk it up to that. And I say this about adults too. When it comes to the paranormal and personal experience, like, I will listen to anybody's story, because at the end of the day, like, first of all, who am I to say that that's not what happened to them, even if it sounds outlandish? And second of all, the person believes that this happened to them, that this was their experience. And regardless of whether it was real or not, it was real to them. So I think it's good that I know how to address it with her and how to be there for her. But it's also difficult because as it started over the past year, I know that there's like nothing I can really do about it. And it's just something that she's going to have to go through. And all I can do is just be there for her and help her any way that I can. But it's interesting because I found out, recently I discovered more about my birth parents. I found out that my birth father, on my birth father's side, I think she would have been my great grandmother. She was like a medium, and in Puerto Rico, she would actually have a lot of people come to her for readings and stuff like that.
So do you have a Spanish? I was going to ask, because my mom's maiden name was Carlotta Maria Suarez, but she kind of was abandoned as a child. I was just curious: are you Puerto Rican, Spanish? Is that some of your descent, or what's your background?
Yeah, it's mostly, I've also done those like 23andMe, Ancestry.com things.
Yeah,
I mostly, the majority of me is comprised it's Spain, areas along the Mediterranean.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So that's a good portion of me.
So
for
Suarez
sure. Yeah.
was my mother's maiden name. Let's see if we're distantly related.
Yeah, well, it hasn't come up on any of my like second, third cousins on my 23andMe or Ancestry.com, like that name. So I don't know. Who knows?
So before one quick point before we close with the last question, which is, I think your daughter is very fortunate to have a mom like you that's been through this and knows kind of how to shepherd her through this, which is great. I know you didn't have that growing up and other people didn't. So I think that's good. So, in closing, before we ask you for plugs and what you're working on and how people can kind of subscribe to Vidi Space, can you give us maybe the 2 or 3 at a very highlight level, the either the most haunted places or the most outlandish experience you had, whether it was as part of a ghost hunter or even before you started doing this? Is there one or, maybe even 1 or 2 that stick out?
Yeah, definitely. The most haunted location that I've been to definitely be Shepton Mallet Prison in the UK. There was at the time they were like excavating the 1600-year-old jail cells that they had just found. The grounds, there was a particular area where all the executions happened. And man, I have never in my life been to an area or a place that just had the darkest, most, I don't know. Like if death lives somewhere, it lives at Shepton Mallet Prison.
Wow.
Like it really, like it just made you so uncomfortable. There was this one section where like I'd be like setting up equipment or like looking at the grounds. It was it was an area that you just like wanted to run by. You didn't even want to walk. You just felt like there was somebody like on your back and like with you. And there's an area where a lot of people just that even work there won't even go. They refuse to go because of the experiences that they've had there. And it was an interesting location because a lot of people that were a part of the crew that never had experiences, don't necessarily believe in this stuff. They would, at dusk, it was interesting. You would see a lot of people, when it's called shadow people, they would see a lot of that activity at dusk. You would just see people like walking back and forth in and out of the shadows. It was definitely a creepy place for sure.
So it wasn't one thing; it was just a barrage of things. Apparently, this
Yeah,
place.
it really was. Yeah, but
Yeah.
the energy, I will never forget the energy of that place. It just, it was very dark.
Did it follow you back? Were you able to? What do you do to cleanse yourself when you leave? Do you have any type of cleansing thing that you do when you leave a location so nothing follows you home?
You know, in the beginning, when I first started investigating, I would listen to all kinds of people saying all kinds of things. And I probably have tried literally everything. The first few times I ever investigated, I did get like very drained. And I've made it a point in my life to keep it as separate as humanly possible from the place that I live. When I'm home, I make it like a safe space. It's not something that I indulge in.
Yeah, I mean, I hear different rituals from different people. I think the bottom line is it's a state of mind and whatever works for you to keep yourself a barrier around you. Whether you spray yourself with frankincense or whatever, or where you do a prayer or just set your mind. I think it's kind of pretty much probably a state of mind that really protects people, and if they make themselves less receptive after they leave.
Absolutely.
Okay, so is there another place that you went that kind of like really surprised you and had a lot more activity than you thought?
Gosh, there's definitely been a lot of places that have had more activity than I thought. But there was this one location that was in Vermont that I did with my team years ago. And we were brought there. It was like a clergy case. We were brought there to try and the first visit, we had 2 visits. The first visit was just to figure out what was going on there, how bad it really was. And then the second visit was meant intentionally with specific instructions to cleanse the place. And a family lived there. It was snowing when we got there. It was, I didn't really know what to expect, to be honest. I didn't know whether to believe that, demonic things were happening at this location. I just tried to go in without any expectations. So we get there and we walk in the door, and the first thing I noticed, the first thing I saw out of the corner of my eye looked like a woman that was kind of glowing that had passed by the front door. And I thought to myself, like, oh, this is weird. I didn't say anything to, Hiram at the time, but I did mention something to Mike, who was a friend of mine and who was also, I would say he's more of a medium, but he also saw it at the same time that I did. And we kind of just kept it to ourselves. So we're setting up and everything. And a lot of times Hiram would let Mike and I go through the space by ourselves before we started using equipment, which I always thought was really cool. So we're going around. We go up to the master bedroom. And all of a sudden, I look at Mike, and I've investigated with him a bunch by this point. And he does something weird. He like opened up his hands. And he says, if there's any spirits that wish to cross over, I can help you. And he's never done this. Anytime we've investigated, it was the most bizarre thing.
Really?
And then all of a sudden, I felt like a train of energy come into the room and everything shifted. And I felt like there was a clouds like just that went over my brain. And I couldn't really see properly. It sounds very bizarre, but I just felt like this wave of energy. It was like a train came in the room. And I remember looking at Mike, and there was a voice in my head that told me, you have to get out of the house. You have to get out of the house. So he's still standing there. He's not looking like himself at all. I start making my way down the stairs. I think I vaguely remember Hiram saying to me, are you okay? Making like some joke, like, I don't know. And I just remember like the mantra in my head, get out of the house, get out of the house. So I get out of the house and everything lifts. Like it was clear as day. Like I felt fine all of a sudden. And I think to myself, oh my God, Mike's still in. I have to go make sure that he's okay. But he just he comes outside shortly after as I'm going to go back in. And he's like deep breathing and stuff like that. And I was like, what was that? Like, what were you doing, first of all? But also, what just happened? I don't understand what just happened. And he looks at me and he's struggling to talk to me. And he says, honestly, Elizabeth, when I looked at you, all I could think of was that I wanted to kill you.
Oh my God.
I was like, oh my gosh, this is,
Wow.
And that was like the start of this investigation. It was one of those locations, I'm sure you've been to them before, where like there's areas of the location that are just very different. Just very, very different.
How did you continue going back in when he said he wanted to kill you? I give you credit for that.
God.
I mean,
Well, yeah, he was a best friend at the time, and like I honestly yeah, something I've mentioned to people before is like definitely you have to trust the people that you investigate with. From a spiritual side, it's like, you're all opening yourself up, and I think people like vastly underestimate what we're all capable of. Especially spiritually when our energy comes together. I think after we spent some time outside and had a discussion about the experience, he told me what he saw. He was describing this entity that he felt that was like with him in a weird sense. And he got guidance later from a medium that said it was a very ancient spirit that resided at that location. And it was just mad.
Did he pass it on?
He struggled afterwards. He actually did take something back with him, and he had to go through a process of cleansing. Like it was tormenting him and his wife for a period of time. But like, I think it's hard because you want to. Residential situations are very interesting because it's very selfless endeavor. Like you want to help the people at this location that are obviously having some sort of experience just so they can have a peaceful night's sleep,
Yeah,
so it's like after our conversation, we went back inside. I think Hiram thought we were a little crazy, but that's fine. I mean, like it was definitely a place where it was just very different. Like the main floor, the upstairs were just dark is the best way to put it. And then downstairs, the guy that used to live there, his workshop was down there, and he came through, and it was like the audio that we would get from him, it was like he was still like working down there, which was kind of neat. But everywhere else, it was the location we had to come back a second time for, and actually we had instructions to cleanse the property and the area, and then they didn't have any more issues after that. But it was very bizarre. We recorded while we were cleansing the place, and Mike had some EVPs of like screaming during that time, and it was weird. It was just a weird place.
Well, that's a good place to end. Thanks, Elizabeth. So want to give us a plug on, once again, to where people can go to Vidi Space and kind of subscribe to it, and anything else that you're working on, or where to look for you on Amazon Prime, Vidi Space films?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can go to www.vidi.space. It's not .com, it's .space. Or you can just Google Vidi Space, and we're an online streaming platform. We cater mostly to the paranormal, cryptid, UFO, documentary, horror. And yeah, you can find us. We have an app that you can download on any of your portable devices, or if you have Apple TV or Fire Stick or Roku. And if you use the coupon code ILOVESPACE in all capital letters, you get 50% off your first year of a monthly subscription.
Awesome. Great. And you can watch Afraid of Nothing on there, as well as Small Town Monster Films and more. So this has been awesome. Thank you so much. I love talking to you and meeting you again. Thank you. And I look forward to following what's going on with you and checking out some more great content on Vidi Space.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Afraid of Nothing podcast. Please subscribe and like us on Facebook. Until next time, stay scared.
Hey, you're still here? Great. Then why not listen to another episode? Visit afraidofnothingpodcast.com to peruse all the shows. That's afraidofnothingpodcast.com. And while you're there, click the coffee cup icon to buy me a coffee and leave a review. I'll give you a shout out in an upcoming episode. And the world will know how swell you are.